I don't know if you've ever met someone who has actually died and gone to heaven and came back to tell about it. Well, when I wrote my book, Heaven on My Mind, I actually interviewed two people. Both are still alive today, so they can tell you their own story. But I went looking for people who had died and had stories of heaven. I knew several stories that I'd heard, but those people had all passed away. So I want to tell you real quickly the story of just two people, Alice Ottinger, and then, I have like 4 or 5 stories in here, but I think I'll just tell you the one of Alice Ottinger and Mark Skaggs real quick. So Alice Ottinger is a lady who currently lives in Greenville, Tennessee, and years ago she was having a baby, and this is when she was a much younger lady. She was having a baby and died on the operating table. There were complications in the birth, and Alice actually died. And this is the story she's told me with her own mouth, and she can still tell you the story because she's still around to verify all of this. She said that she felt like that she left her body and got on a canoe with her baby, and she was going down this peaceful stream. She said everywhere she looked it was lush and green, and it was like the most perfect spring day you could ask for. And she was just kind of floating down this little river. And she noticed the flowers were amazing. The thickness of the petals and everything was unlike anything she'd ever seen. She said the canoe, or the little boat she was in, kind of drifted over to the side. And when it drifted to the side, there was a lady that she recognized. It was her aunt who had raised her, that came over to her and said, "Alice, it's time to give me the baby." And she said, "I will raise her for you. I will take care of her for you. And then when you come to heaven, you'll get to meet her again. And she'll tell you all the stories about how she grew up." And Alice handed the baby to her aunt that she trusted, who had raised her as a child. And so after that, Alice said that she came back too. She was in the operating room. She survived it, but her child did not survive. They knew that the baby had not survived the birth. And she said this moment gave her such peace that her entire life growing up, she knows that this baby is growing up in heaven, and that one of these days she's going to meet a beautiful young girl, a baby girl, a beautiful young lady in heaven who's going to give her all the stories she missed. Maybe that's what the Bible means when it talks about turning our mourning into dancing and our sorrows into joy. Maybe people who have lost someone and have felt that deep pain on this side is going to have an incredible experience of joy in heaven that other people can't even begin. There was another man who was in my church when I pastored in St. Louis. His name was Mark Skaggs, and his mother was one of the greatest worshipers I've ever met. She was in her 90s and still was just an incredible worshiper and just a woman of intense faith. Well, Mark had not lived his life for the Lord, in spite of the fact that he had brothers who were preachers and several siblings that attended church. Mark had just not lived his life for the Lord. He lived his life, partying and carousing and doing things that he wanted to do. But Mark went in for a routine surgery, and in this surgery, they didn't know, it should have just been a routine hip replacement surgery, but in this surgery, a blood clot went to his brain and killed him, went to his heart. He had a heart attack and died. And they went and told the family that Mark had not survived it. But there was one nurse who felt like that Mark still had life in him. And she, regardless of everyone else giving up, for 30 minutes, she just kept pumping on his chest and giving him resuscitation. She just kept, giving him the airbag and pumping on his chest there in the operating room. And everyone else gave up, but she just could not. She said, "I think I see a twitch in his eye. I think I see something that lets me know he's still with us." And she just kept working on him. Finally, she got his heart to beating again. Well, the doctor said, "You've ruined this man's life. He'll never speak. He'll be a vegetable." He was dead for over 30 minutes. There's no way that he'll ever be able to have any normal life after being dead this long. Well, Mark was in intensive care for almost a month. He was unconscious most of that time. Finally, his eyes opened. he came to. They had a breathing tube in him, helping him breathe. And when they took the breathing tube out, one of the first things he said in a whisper, because he had been incubated for over a month, he said to his mom, "Go get the pastor." And in a quiet, raspy voice. And she immediately called for me. I went to Mark's bedside. And he told me this story. Later on when he got out, and by the way, Mark is fully recovered. He's living a wonderful life, a perfectly healthy life. God did a miracle in him. But God wanted Mark to have this dramatic experience of going to heaven and coming back so that he could be an evangelist for the Lord, which he is. Well, Mark tells a story of sitting by a lake, and he thought that he was there for days and days and days. He did not know that it was just 30 minutes of being dead on this earth. He thought that he was there for days. He said that he'd sit by this beautiful lake that had the bluest, clearest water he had ever seen, and that he just sit there, and it was peaceful and quiet. He didn't want to leave. He said he just felt like he had been there for the longest time. And then all of a sudden, he saw someone coming in the distance who came and sat down beside him. He describes him as having a purple robe on, and he said that the material on the robe was like this thick. He'd never seen anything like it, like 2 inches thick for the material. And he said he had kind of a hood over his head. The robe had a hood on it. And he said this man just came and sat beside of him and then reached up and put his hand on his shoulder, never said a word. He never got to see the man's face. He just saw him when he walked up to the side, and he felt his hand on his shoulder. He said when that man, which we now know is Christ, when that man walked away in his purple robe, another man whom he did recognize, a guy who was my armor bearer for years, who had passed away a couple of years earlier, his name was D.J. Haynes. He said he was dressed in a beautiful white garment, and he came over, and he's the only one who spoke. And all he said was, "Mark, it's time for you to go back now." And from that experience, Mark Skaggs radically turned his life around, because he got to peek through heaven's window. He got to see a small glimpse of what is waiting on the other side. Peace, joy, beauty, loved ones, unlike anything we've ever seen. So if you ever get a chance to talk to someone who's had one of those, not near-death experiences, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about people who died, went to heaven, but was sent back to give us evidence of a place that we're all trying to get to. I hope that blesses you, and if you ever want a great read, just pick up Heaven on My Mind, and you'll feel like you've sat down and visited with all of your loved ones on the other side.